Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Ian. I am back with another video today, and I'm super excited to be joined by Molly O'Neill, the author of Greenteeth. Hi, Molly. How are you?
Hi Ian, I'm good. How are you?
I am excellent. I'm so excited to be talking to you about this book. It was one of my favorites of last year, made my top 10, which is no easy feat. And it's out. It's out. How does it feel?
It feels wonderful. Like it really just feels like a dream come true. And it's been such a good, easy process with my wonderful publisher, Orbit. It feels very creatively empowering to be out.
I'm sure it does. It was also just announced that your book Greenteeth is the Barnes& and Noble Speculative Fiction Book of the Month. That is a huge accomplishment. How's that feel?
It's incredible. Obviously it's just a really important bookstore in America, and I've been in Barnes and Nobles when I visited over there, and so I was just absolutely gobsmacked when it came out. I didn't realize that was a possibility. So full credit to my amazing Orbit US team for sorting that out. And it's a real honor because that's a high quality list of people that have had that.
Yeah. It is, and it's an incredible way of promoting your book as well. I feel like it's gonna very much like get your book in front of a lot of people that maybe wouldn't normally have seen it. And I think so many of the qualities of this book are things that people will love in books, so that may not have seen it otherwise. And as soon as they read what it's about, I think that there are so many of the book's qualities that are going to call out to them, whether it's the found family, the adventure, the coziness, the comparisons to like T. Kingfisher and things like that. I think as soon as they see that, they're going to absolutely pick it up and take it to the counter because it's a great book, and it's one that I think is going to be a real hit with a lot of people. So congratulations on being that. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's a real honor.
Greenteeth is your debut novel, and a lot of people will just now be getting their hands on it because it just came out this week. So I'd love it if you just tell me, what is Greenteeth about?
Great. So Greenteeth follows a story of Jenny Greenteeth, who's a very minor character in British folklore. She's a river hag that lives in a lake and likes to eat people. So she's never speaks to any humans. And then one day, a witch is drowned in her lake. Someone throws her in to try and drown her, and Jenny decides to rescue this witch. And together they go off on an adventure to try and defeat the evil that's affecting both of their lives.
Yeah, that about sums it up. I loved the book from the get-go, and in my review of it that I posted 4 or 5 months ago, I basically said like everything you just described is basically like the first chapter, and then the book just goes and into this grand adventure that just spans so much distance and a good amount of time. You know, not like a couple days. It takes at least weeks, or I can't even remember if it was like over a month. It was quite a bit of time, and there's so many characters, and there is excitement and adventure and doom and evil and good, and it's just such an expansive novel. And it can be so succinctly described just by that first chapter of you've got Jenny Greenteeth and a witch is thrown in her lake, and things go from there. Yeah, such a fun novel, and I'm so glad that so many people get to read it now. I'm curious because you mentioned how Jenny Greenteeth is, you know, from like Arthurian mythology, but she's like a very minor character. What about Jenny Greenteeth like really grabbed your attention and made you want to write this book about her?
I think it was because she's such a non-entity in British folklore. There was no real backstory to her. She's just a name, and she's a very minor figure to be quickly defeated by a hero, and like a bit of a scuffle, and then they can carry on with their great idealistic quest. So I like the fact that she was just a very small character that I could project my own things onto. And I also like that she was so obviously evil looking. Like she's got like lots of spiky teeth. She's very scary. And I like the idea of playing with that and kind of taking that scary, haggish creature and making her very neat and tidy, whilst also keeping her scary and, happy to eat humans now and then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you did such a great job with that because I think in some ways like Jenny kind of surprised herself in the book with like the humanity that she experiences, because like on the one hand she's like, I would normally eat this person, but for some reason I'm not gonna, and things just go from there. And that was such a huge thing of like her character development throughout, where she's not just this monster, but that's like immediately everyone's first impression of her, and it's something that she is forcibly having to identify with as a monster because that's what everyone sees her as, and her grappling with that was such an interesting internal conflict in the story. And to your point, she is such a minor character that whilst reading your book, I didn't realize that she was a character that you just didn't entirely come up with on your own. I was like, I'd never heard of Jenny Greenteeth. And so it wasn't until after the fact that I was like, oh no, this is something that already existed. But at the same time, you made her so much more than anything that she's ever been before. That must have been so interesting to write. And I'm curious, with that writing process of her character, were there like any changes to how you saw her throughout the writing process? Like, did she kind of like start out one way, and the more you wrote, you discovered she was more this way, or like what was writing her like for you?
I think I got her kind of internal voice pretty quickly when I was writing the first chapter, and it was a bit of a surprise to me because I hadn't written previously in the first person,
Hmm.
and it just came out in the first person. It's written as like I do this, um, and then when I was thinking it, I tried really hard to think of the physicality of her. So she struggles walking on land at first, and um, because she lives underwater, her lungs are always full of water, and so she can't speak very easily at first. And that kind of physical barrier between her and the people she interacts with really helped get me into her mindset.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you needed this story to be first person. Like I really don't feel like it could have been written any other way because this story is so much about Jenny, and about her internal conflicts and everything she's feeling and going through and her perspective on the world and how that shifts throughout the story. And it's interesting also because like it very easily could have been a story about temperance and like her being thrown in the lake and then like stumbling upon Jenny Greenteeth and all that. But I think having it from Jenny's perspective was so much more powerful, and so much more interesting as well. There are tons of stories about witches coming across monsters, but writing about the monster and humanizing her was excellent. I loved that. So, kind of talking about the characters a little bit more. So you've got Jenny Greenteeth, of course, but it's really a story that has a great found family in it. You've got your three main characters: Jenny Greenteeth, Temperance, and Brackus. And I just want to get a question out of the way because it feels right. I want you to rank those three, your favorite to your least favorite.
Oh, that is so hard.
You have to do it.
I don't think I can really pick anyone except Jenny to be my favorite. I
It's
think she
got to
just
be.
is my favorite. And then picking between Brackus and Temperance is tough. Um, I actually think I'm going to say Brackus second. Like I know he's
Really?
probably the third character. Like in terms of importance in the book, it goes Jenny, Temperance, Brackus.
Mhm.
But in terms of my favorite to write, Brackus was really fun.
Brackus
Um,
was very interesting. I agree.
and he surprised me. I didn't think he was going to stick around. And I was just having so much fun writing him. I was like, well, maybe he could come along and contribute. And I think he does play a pretty important part in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's interesting you mentioned that because that was one of my questions was like Temperance is very much like the catalyst for the story, like her being thrown into the lake is what gets Jenny, moving and gets her out of her lake and everything. But Brackus is this additional character, and I was curious, like with him, like how his role in the story kind of developed and changed from what you first expected.
So Brecca starts out just providing ingredients for a spell. And so I knew that he would have to come into that. But then he was such a great character when I was writing him. I was like, I just wanted to see him again. So I got him to pop back up. And then I was like, well, I think what really clinched it for me is that he's not just a passing salesman. He really loves Jenny. He's a really has a real fondness for her as a friend. And I think although Jenny hides that from the reader for a long time, she doesn't want to admit that she has friends or that she's hiding it from herself as well. And I thought that was a good way to bring that in.
Yeah, so just to kind of speak to like the other side of it, I think you really nailed that execution because Brackus was a character that at first I, as the reader, like I didn't trust him, and I almost didn't like him because Jenny's perspective is so much like oh, this guy's the worst. And every time he comes around, she's so annoyed. And so for me, I was like, oh, I don't like this guy, but he wins you over in such a charming way that like by the time they're setting off on this adventure, I was cheering that he was coming along because I was like, I don't really care what Jenny thinks anymore. I think this guy's hilarious and just so fun. So you really pulled that off because I love Brackus so much. I agree. Like Jenny is like the heart of the story, so you kind of have to say like Jenny's, the best. But Brackus is so good. I love Brackus. So him and okay, is it pronounced Caval or Caval? How do you pronounce the dog's name?
I pronounce it Caval, but
Caval.
I'm not actually Welsh, so there's a possibility I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm really just going off pronunciations I found online.
That's fair. That's fair. I appreciate your honesty. Yeah, I loved that dog so much. And was such an added element. Like there are so many tropes that I love in this book, and that's one of the reasons like I feel like so many people are going to just resonate with it is because it pulls together so many comforting and like familiar storytelling pieces, but does them in such a charming and unique and fresh way that I feel like it's just gonna like absolutely resonate with so many readers. But the animal companion is just like one that always gets me. Like it goes back to like when I was a kid reading like Where the Red Fern Grows and things like that. So as soon as you brought a dog in, I was like, this is a whole nother level. It's so good.
Yeah,
So
I knew if I was going to put an animal companion in, well, like so Breckus like has a purpose in the story as well, especially for the first of the quests.
mhm.
But I'm a big dog person, and I often find it in books dogs are just kind of there, and I really wanted to put in like all the annoying things that dogs do all the time, like kind of like pestering for food and won't come back and run off with stuff, and I love all that stuff. So I wanted to put that in all the time, and sometimes it breaks tension in a helpful way too.
Yeah, I can definitely agree, and especially with this dog in particular because of where he comes from in the story, which I'm not going to get into because it's a little spoilery. Um, I just didn't know what to expect. I was like, is this going to be like some guard dog and like be super, just like stereotypical kind of thing? But no, he's the full package of a dog. Like so many of his interactions with them, I was like, yeah, my dog does that. Yep, my dog's done that. Great. So I was waiting for him to like dig a hole under a fence and, and all that.
Yeah.
So, um, so kind of with that in mind, I'm curious. What were like some things when you were beginning this story that like you knew wanted to be kind of the heart of the story, aside from like Jenny, because it is about Jenny, but it's also this beautiful story about like found family and identity in yourself and like kind of your own perception of who you are and how other people view you. I'm just curious, like what was your thematic like inspiration for this story?
I think I really want to talk about like motherhood and the bonds between women. So really, it's like a found sisterhood between Temperance and Jenny. But also, Temperance is quite unusual in a significant character in that she's a mother, and she's not necessarily going on a quest to find love and family. She already has that, and it's about how far she's going to go and figuring out um, that she can be a hero in her own story, as well as kind of being a mother and a wife. So that was something I wanted to play with. And I also really wanted to tell a very simple quest story, but spin it up a bit, make it a bit more fun, and pay homage to the really quirky local legends in British folklore.
Yeah, and you absolutely did. I think it was really well pulled off, and I loved, yeah, Temperance's journey, and that was something that really also stood out to me about this book. Is in a lot of other authors' hands, this very easily could have been like the same kind of like story idea, but more of like a love story or like romance focus. But it's really not at all. It's the found family, and it's also yeah, like forging your own way and your own identity, both for Temperance and for Jenny. And that was something I really appreciated because again, like it very easily could have been tweaked to become a romance of some kind, and I don't think it needed to be. And I think that it was a great story on its own.
Yeah, I mean, I love romance in fantasy, but and my editor and I did discuss it a little bit, and we were concerned that maybe it wouldn't land without a romantic element. But we turned it over, we turned it over, we just couldn't find anywhere to put romance in.
Yeah, I wondered about
Yeah,
that. Jenny and Brackus could have been.
brother and sister, I think.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. That's good. But I did wonder if there was ever a moment where there was a romance in there. So interesting. Okay, cool. So you mentioned like how you really wanted to pay tribute to these like Arthurian legends and folklore and things like that. Where did that like love for that type of story come from? Like, was there any particular like experience with Arthurian legends that like really resonated with you when you were younger, or like where did that love come from?
Um, well, there's a lot of it around if you grow up in Britain. It's kind of a low level bubbling along, similar to kind of the Greek myths. Um, and then I read several books as a child that focused around. I certainly read the Sword and the Stone, the Disney film when I was a kid, and loved that. And then there's a series of books called Arthur at the Crossing Places by I think Kevin Crossley Holland, and that takes you through the Arthurian legends, whilst contrasting it with the actual medieval setting, like a kind of crusader setting. So I really loved that. Um, and yeah, I think I saw Merlin, the BBC series. So that was all kind of bubbling around in my head as kind of background knowledge. And I grew up near uh, Glastonbury, which is a very important site in Arthurian lore. And I've been to Tintagel, which is in Cornwall, which is the alleged site of his castle. So it's all just kind of in my head. It's kind of part of they call it the Matter of Britain, is the name for
Hmm.
it.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, as someone from the United States, I'm so like vaguely familiar with a lot of the things, and obviously like it's just kind of a staple of pop culture and things like that. And it exists in so many different ways, but like the history behind it and the way that it's just so present in your culture is so fascinating to me. And I'm kind of curious. You talked a little bit about like the places you grew up and had visited and things like that, and just from reading the author info from the back of the book, I know you grew up in Cotswolds. How do you say that?
Yeah, the Cotswolds. It's
Yeah,
a hill range like um, the Smoky Mountains.
gotcha. Yeah, I looked it up and it is gorgeous. My goodness. And so I was kind of curious. I mean, obviously there are some like real life places because it's like a historical fantasy of sorts. There are real life places that are in the book Greenteeth, but how did your upbringing and living in a place like that beautiful play into like your descriptions of like nature and things like that? Because that's so prevalent in the book. I'm curious how that played in.
Well, I grew up right on the edge of the biggest town in the Cotswolds, Cheltenham. So about a 5 minute walk from where I grew up was kind of the hills, and we had dogs growing up, so I was always taking them out, and my family were always going up on walks on the hills. So it was always just something I knew. I had relatives that had farms, so I'd spend time on farms, and I really like the kind of dichotomy of the countryside as both beautiful but also gritty.
Hmm.
And if you grow up in the countryside, you pretty quickly pick that up too. So that felt very natural to just describe. And when I wrote it, I was sitting in Australia where I moved in 2019, and just thinking about all the places I'd been and kind of going through them again in my mind was really great. And also, I'm a geologist, so I've spent a lot of time on fieldworks around the UK and Australia. And so, pretty much all of the places we go to in the book are places I went on trips with university or worked. And so as part of that work, you go out and you make notes and you observe. It's not just kind of looking at the hillside. It's like you have to think really carefully about the structure and what that means and process that. And so I was very used to taking like detailed images in my head and descriptions.
Yeah, and it's absolutely evident. I mean, people say like you write what you know, and you have the benefit of having such an interesting perspective and knowledge and experience as a geologist. And it totally shines through in your novel. As I was reading it, I was just like, I can picture this so clearly. It's so vivid. And I felt almost like, even though I was nestled underneath a blanket in my bed reading it on my Kindle, I was like, am I in the woods? Like, it felt so real. So that kind of leads me to talking about that a little bit. What was your first passion? Was it geology? Was it writing or reading, or what's your true heart passion?
Definitely reading is where like I've been reading pretty much since I could walk. I just absolutely love it. Read all sorts: fantasy, sci-fi, literary fiction, horror, um, romance occasionally. And so I was always a huge reader. And then I discovered geology when I was about 17 or 18,
Mhm.
and just absolutely fell in love with that as well. But I never really thought I could be a writer. I always thought that was for people who kind of knew from when they were about 5 that they wanted to be a writer and kind of grew up writing. that's a story that so many fabulous authors tell. And I was like, well, that's not my story, so I probably don't have anything interesting to say or to write about. I don't have any ideas. And then when I moved to Australia, I met this group of friends who were aspiring writers, and they all seemed really great, but also kind of normal. And I thought, well, maybe writers aren't some kind of secret cults. Maybe I could just have a go. And they kind of encouraged me to start, which is I'm really grateful to them for that. And then
Yeah.
I just started writing, and as soon as you start, I find the ideas just started flowing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting also because people say that like writing is a very like lonely work and I very isolated. And on the one hand it is, but having a community of writers can be one of the most challenging and encouraging things in the world as well, because they inspire you and they just bring out something different in you. And so that's awesome that you discovered them. And I'm grateful. I got to read Greenteeth as a result. So I'm curious though, I'm what was your writing journey like? Like kind of getting into that later on. Was Greenteeth like your first true like really put everything into it, or have you written other books beforehand that never saw the light of day, at least not yet? Or what's that journey been like for you?
So when I first started writing, I wrote this book called Snapdragon, which hasn't ever seen the light of day. It was very much kind of a first book, very standard adventure fantasy. We might come back to it eventually, but right now it's in a drawer. But I did query it just kind of to experience the process
Hmm.
of emailing agents with excerpts, and I didn't get anything back, absolutely nothing. So I thought that's okay. But I like writing for its own sake. I think I would write even. I think well, I have written with no hope of getting anything published, and I think I would do it anyway. So I had this idea for Greenteeth, and I started writing it, and then I forced my parents and my best friend to read it, and they were like, "This is quite good." So I queried it again, and then my agent picked it up. So I'm
That's
very grateful for that.
fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. And querying is such a vulnerable process, because you're putting this work that you've spent literally hours and hours and hours of your life on, and then you're sending out to so many people. That is can be discouraging. So I'm glad that you kept at it and gave it a go with another novel, and then it paid off. But I do hope to get to read that other one day. You said it's called Snapdragon.
Yes,
Sounds
yes.
delightful. I'm in. Send it my way. I'll beta read it for you. That's awesome. Well, I'm really not at all surprised that Greenteeth resonated with your agent, and I think that it's going to really be quite a hit. I hope so, because it deserves all the readers in the world. What was it like for you, like getting on with Orbit though? Because I know that's like such for like the fantasy readers in general. I mean, there's so many great Orbit titles and authors, so that must have been such a surreal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I really felt that. So my agent's absolutely wonderful, and when I signed with him, I was like, well, if this is as good as it ever gets, it's pretty damn good. If getting to work with my agent and talk about my book with a professional book agent and work on it together, that's fantastic. That's really all I need. And then when we started, we all but asked for an exclusive look, um, for a 3 week exclusive look, and I was like, well, fantastic. I get to put my book in the hands of an editor, and they'll come back with comments even if they don't like it. And then when they made an offer, I was just absolutely speechless. I called my brother on the phone, and I just sort of like gasped down the phone to him. I couldn't think of any words. Um, and then so I was just really pleased with that. And my agent had to be like, no, Molly, you can't just give it to them for free. You have to ask them in
You
advance.
have to ask
And I
for
was like,
money.
I'm just so happy. They didn't need anything.
That's a true
um,
writer. Yeah.
yeah, and just working on the book with my editor Emily has been incredibly creatively empowering and fulfilling, and in a way that I really wasn't expecting. It's so great to work with someone who just like sees books structurally as well, and can help you just correct things. So it's been really really great, and obviously Orbit is just like the publisher, the
Right.
dream publisher.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. That is humongous. So you kind of talked about your editor and your agent, and I'm kind of curious with their involvement. I mean, publishing a book really does take a whole lot more than just the author. Even though you obviously took on the mother load of the work and the creativity, there's so many people that contribute to that process. And I'm curious, were there any like revisions or changes throughout the writing and editing process that really like changed the story a lot when you got like those different perspectives?
um, Not a lot. The biggest change was probably when we did with my agent, where we pulled apart the middle of the book and put it back together again, and then the rest of it with my editor, it was just kind of turning this up a little bit, turning this down a little bit, adjusting here and there, trying to make things more like try to turn things up to the max, like make it as emotionally resonant as possible. And I've done things like I've forgotten that Temperance didn't mention her children throughout the entire center of the book, and my editor was like, "Well, I've got kids. I would definitely be thinking about them. Like they'd be popping up." So that was probably but it was probably about 50-50, my agent and my editor.
That's awesome.
And both absolutely fantastic to work with. And also shout out to my copy editor, who wrote on the cover of the book, really like this. Great, use a very light hand while we're editing this. And I saw that and I thought, well, clearly I'm the best author ever. And then I opened it and it was just covered in red ink all the way through. And I was like, okay, back to earth now.
That is amazing. I would hate to see one that she had a heavy hand with. So
yeah.
So moving on to a couple more questions about the book itself. What was, I guess, your thought process behind the villain of this book? And can you tell me a little bit about the villain?
So the villain is a new pastor who's come to the village where Jenny and Temperance live. But it's quickly revealed that he's not actually just a human. He's kind of a demonic entity trapped in or possessing a human. I started him out as a pastor because that's kind of the traditional witch trial thing, is like pastors seeking out witches and throwing them in lakes and trying to burn them. But I knew that it was going to be a more epic fantasy than that, and that he wasn't quite enough villain on his own. And the Earl King is a figure from, I think, Germanic folklore, although he originally, way back when, comes from the steppes from Central Asia. And I just wanted to make him incredibly evil and dark, but also a tiny bit sympathetic. He's just who he is, in kind of the same way that Jenny is who she is, and almost contrast those two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that contrast is very visible, and it's interesting how the story really does evolve throughout. Like, it does start out and almost feel like this small, like, cozy fantasy historical kind of setting, but it really does very quickly become that epic fantasy you're talking about. I mean, not only in regard to the Earl King, but just some of the other creatures and beings that we interact with in the story. It's very clear that yes, this is our world, but there's this vast other world that exists here as well, and just getting to explore that was really, really rewarding. And I love just kind of discovering the different paths that the story took, as well as the different adventures and trials or quest challenges that these lovely characters get ensnared into. That was such a different approach to the story as well, because you kind of start out with, okay, we need to create this potion, and that seems like one thing, but it very quickly leads into this whole other experience for the characters. And I do wonder, like, with all of that, with the quest and where the story ends up, like, how much of that vision did you have, like, at the start of the writing process? Did you kind of have a full picture in your head before? Like, are you a planner or are you a pantser? Like, what was that whole experience like for you?
Oh, I'm a complete planner. I have Excel spreadsheets. You said earlier that the book takes place over quite a long time, several months, and I had days written down because I
Oh my
knew
gosh.
I wanted to track what the phases of the moon were, and I wanted to know how long they were. So yeah, I'm a complete planner in terms of outline. But I originally only had one quest, so it was going to be quite significantly shorter. And I realized I was just having so much fun writing it. I wanted to do more. So I went back and pulled it apart a little bit, and then sent them off to do more and more things. But yeah, I love to plan. I think both planners and pantsers are a little bit insecure about it. Like, I've been insecure that I'm not as purely creative, that I can just set off and write. And I've met pantsers who are like, well, I wish I could plan. That sounds more purely creative to me. So I think there's no right way to do it.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. Everyone has their own style, and at the end of the day, it's going to be a book that is defined by rewrites anyway. So you do what
Yes.
you got to do. So question about your characters and kind of like your writing process with them. When you were thinking about, I mean, Jenny is a little bit different because her physical nature is very different from the other characters. But when writing like Brackus and Temperance, did you have like specific like people in mind or like actors or anything? Like if you could cast them in a film, who would you have play all these characters?
So I think my dream cast for the Temperance would be Olivia Cook, who's
Okay.
currently in House of the Dragon.
Hmm.
I think she'd be great, kind of that kind of like 30s ish, and she plays a very strong mother character in that as well.
Can
So
absolutely see
I
it.
think
Yeah.
she'd be really good. And then Brackus, there's just so many good actors that could do it. Maybe like I think Hugh Grant would be great, although he's probably a little
I
bit too
love that.
old. But that kind of like level of cheekiness, I think would be great.
Very
Um,
good. I love Hugh Grant.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
What about Jenny? So, I mean, obviously there's certain makeup and all that that would have to go into that, but anybody in mind for Jenny?
If I could pick anyone, I would probably pick Emma Stone.
Oh, nice. I can see that.
I think she's very beautiful, obviously, but can look weird when she wants to, and can act very like some of her more recent work,
Like poor
like Poor
things.
Things,
Mhm.
exactly. Uh, I think she'd be great at that sort of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I loved, at the time I was reading it, I went and followed you on Instagram and you already had the commissioned artwork up for the characters. So I loved having that visual. And I was already maybe 30% of the way through the book. And so I'd already met all of the characters and seeing them, I was like, yep, that's exactly what I was thinking too. So it was
Yeah.
perfectly done. I love that. Um, so, aside from the main three, and of course, Caval, um, do you have a favorite side character that you really enjoyed writing about, whether they were in for just a moment or for any other length of time?
So I think probably the Fairy Queen Crathalad, mainly because she just has the best name. It's completely unpronounceable.
I was gonna say, how
Um,
did you say that? Let me write that down.
Crathalad. The
Crazy.
double D is spelled like is pronounced th
Oh,
in
okay.
Welsh. Um, and I wanted her and her husband to be because they're quite big characters in the story. I wanted them. I enjoyed writing them as well. I liked that he's kind of this terrifying uh, fairy king, and she's his queen, but she's got him wrapped around her finger. But I also didn't want her to be too benevolent. I wanted her to be a little bit tricky as well because that's just who she is. It's who fairies are. Um, so she was really fun to write.
Yeah, and I think that not only was that a really interesting, they were both very interesting characters to read, and all of those scenes were just so mesmerizing. But I think in a lot of ways they were good exemplification of like the story as a whole because they're these dangerous and like kind of dark almost figures, but at the same time they also offer hope and they also offer help. And that really balances like the two tones of the story because yes, like it's a cozy and like hopeful and exciting and joyful story, but there's also like a lot of darkness and loss and um, grief at times as well. Um, and I'm curious, like throughout that process, did you find it was harder to write like one over the other? Like those darker scenes, did they come more naturally to the story or the hopeful scenes?
I think I found the hopeful kind of bantery scenes between the friends very easy to write. That just kind of like came out of me. And then I found the darker scenes that are more serious a little harder
Mhm.
because I didn't want them to be completely doom and gloom, but I
Right.
did want it to be serious. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to get those pitched right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was very well done. And ultimately, I think it is a hopeful story, you know, despite the darkness. I think it's definitely one that um, was inspiring to read. And at the end of it, like, I think I described it like it was the perfect book at the perfect time when I read it because the climate in America over the latter half of 2024 was kind of um, intense, and so having a book like this, it was like the perfect escapism. So that's another reason why I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people is because it just is so immersive and really swept me away. I think it will for a lot of people too. And again, it's very hopeful in the end. So It's a great book. It's a great book. So a few more questions here, and I do have a couple that I got from people that I asked if they had any questions who've read the book. So we'll get to those in just a minute. Um, but I'm curious. So obviously, like the Arthurian mythology and things like that were very inspirational on you for this book. But are there any like modern authors or books that you've read that were very inspirational, either on like the tone of the book or the characters or just your writing in general?
So I would definitely say the three really big inspirations for me are Naomi Novik, Joe Walton, and KJ Parker. I think they all have. So Naomi Novik is probably what I aspire to write eventually, and I also love Joe Walton and KJ Parker, and I try to steal bits from them and get the tone I wanted, and then kind of I'm not a fantasy author at all, but one my favorite author is Neville Shute, who wrote in the 40s and 50s, and his tone is very kind of simple but meaningful, and that's a tone I really love. So, and he, yeah, I just think he's fantastic. So he's probably
Yeah.
a big inspiration to me as well. And I would also say, in terms of first-person characters, I've been very influenced by reading I Claudius.
Oh, nice.
Um, and that's, I think, a really great example of a first person voice that's so specific to a character that you could read him writing about anything and you still enjoy it. And that's kind of what I was going for with Jenny too.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see that inspiration. And as far as like the Neville Shute goes, I do think that that is a tone and a writing style that you did do very well here, where never at any point, like the writing was gorgeous and very descriptive and very specific, but never did it feel like it was over the top. Like it was very much like digestible, but at the same time, like the imagery was excellent, and it was very well balanced and very easy to just get through. I didn't feel like at any point I was overwhelmed by the writing, so that's really good. Um, I am curious. You have mentioned like a bunch of different genres and authors and things like that. Do you think you'll ever write in a different genre, or do you think that fantasy is your lane?
I would love to give sci-fi a go.
Hmm.
Maybe not for my next few books, but if there is a career of this long term going forward, I'd love to do sci-fi. I love AI and aliens. I haven't really mentioned many of the authors in this chat because it's not where I've directly drawn inspiration from, but it's absolutely fantastic. And I would love to think I could write horror. I don't think I can, but I'll probably have a go at some point.
Gotta try. Gotta try.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you said the words, so I'm going to ask. You said next books. Is there anything you're currently writing that you can tell us anything about, or is it all just kind of down low right now?
So I've got another book coming out next year, which is set in the same world, but it's set in kind of Roman Britain during the Roman occupation. So there's very slight references to the characters in Greenteeth. So there's only the older characters, but it's still untitled, so I can't tell you much more than that. And then I'm also working on a couple of other working projects. I want to do another book set in this world in kind of the Napoleonic Wars. But I don't know how that will turn out. But that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Okay. Wow, so much information. Yeah, because I was going to ask you if you ever thought you'd write a sequel. So those aren't necessarily sequels; they're in the same world. Which that alone makes me happy that we'll hear any mention of any of these characters. Do you think you ever would write a direct sequel to this book, or do you think that the story you wanted to tell is done?
I think for these characters, it wasn't just the story. Like there could potentially be another story there, but the character growth throughout the book is what I think made it interesting. And I think they're pretty settled at the end of the book in who they are, and they like have developed quite a lot from who they were at the start. So I think although I could throw them off on another adventure, there wouldn't be that development in the same way. So I think I'm probably settled at one and done for Jenny and Temperance and Breckus.
That's fair. But Temperance does have children. They have a lot of growing to do. So but you do whatever you got to do. Awesome. Well, that's delightful to hear. Also, that we won't have to wait too long for another book from you. So very exciting. I will definitely keep my eyes open on Orbit's account to get ready to read that. So, yeah. So a couple questions from some people that submitted some questions for you. So first up, do you listen to music while you write? And was there any music that inspired you while writing Greenteeth?
So I can't listen to music with lyrics while I write. And I tried listening to things like the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, which is basically the soundtrack to my life. But I couldn't, it was just too distracting. So what I like to do is I get up like a YouTube video of atmospheric English pub, like
Very nice.
1700s fire crackling, or like you're in an astronomy tower and it's storming outside. I love that stuff. So I would
Nice.
just put that on and listen to that. In terms of not so much for this book, I would say for my next book, there were a couple of songs I would listen to before I started writing it. Um, I think I am putting together a Spotify playlist for Greenteeth,
Yes.
but it's very much kind of reverse engineered. Whereas for the
Makes
next book,
sense.
I took it kind of right all the way through.
Direct inspiration. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I meant to ask some questions about kind of like your writing process. Um, do you feel like there are any like writing essentials for you? Like before you can get started, you have to have this or use this, or what is that like for you?
Um, I think the background noise videos help, and not having too many distractions helps. But once you're into it, I think you should. I try not to make myself too dependent on those sorts of things. Like I like writing in cafes or libraries. I've been known to write in notebooks and stuff. If I think if you get stuck, sometimes switching it up can be good.
Hmm.
My one hack is if I get intense writer's block, I put on a scary film on Netflix because I can't watch scary films, and I lock myself in front of it, so I'm forced to type, so I'm not looking at the screen.
That's hilarious. I mean, if it works, I might have to give that a try. I love scary movies though, so I gotta find the equivalent for me.
Yeah, I was
So funny.
watching The Haunting of Hill House,
Oh, that's
so
amazing though.
it's so good, but I watched it whilst writing because I
That's so funny.
yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. I'd not be writing at all. I'd just be transfixed. I love that miniseries, but awesome. Okay, next question asked by one of the people who's read the book is, what was your favorite character interaction to write?
Jenny and Brackus arguing about stuff.
I
It's
love
just
that.
really, really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely really entertaining. Again, like I also love the development of their relationship because it starts out as like complete dislike and becomes like grudging respect to like whatever it becomes. Such a fun thing, and it's especially interesting because they've known each other for such a long time, and so to finally get those steps in the right direction was really satisfying. I really loved all of the scenes with Jenny and Temperance in her little cave at the start. That it was what like immediately hooked me. I loved like the setup, but like those interactions where Temperance is just there and like Jenny dives down and goes looking for food and then comes back and Temperance is just like terrified a little bit. I loved all of those interactions so much, and getting to see them kind of like warm up to each other was so good.
Mm.
And then also argue because, that's comes naturally in any close friendship. So, yeah. Next question is, how much say did you have in that gorgeous cover?
Absolutely no say. I basically because I'm not very creative visually,
Mm.
so I didn't really have any idea what they were going to do. I was like, I love the Orbit covers. I trust you. You're the professionals. And then it came back, and I thought it was going to be much prettier in a way. Like I thought it was going to be similar to that Fathom Folk cover or Elizabeth Lim's covers, which are
Mm.
really beautiful, but are definitely kind of pretty. And so that's what I was expecting. And then when it came back, I was just taken. Oh, it was fantastic. I pulled it up my phone and just lay there and look at it for like an hour or so. It's just
I
really,
don't
really
blame you.
loved it.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's so detailed as well. Like they really, I mean, again, you said it, Orbit just nails their covers so often. I love so many of their cover designs. But yeah, it's a very intricate piece of artwork. And I also love Jenny being on the cover and how her face isn't like this beautiful face you'd normally see like on a cover of a book. It's very representative of how people see Jenny. I think it was
Yeah.
a really good
We had
decision.
to tone it down a bit. On the first cover, she was very scary, which I loved, but it looked more like a horror film, a horror book.
Right.
And then we went a little bit more, uh, a little bit less scary. And then I think we've ramped up a little bit for the American version. So I think the American copy is my favorite now.
Really? Okay, I was gonna
Yeah.
ask that. I didn't notice that there was a difference in their faces. The only like glaringly different thing is the alignment of the text, whether it's
So
up
they've
and
changed
down.
that now. So I think the copy you have is the um, the art copy where it's like this,
Yeah.
and now they've changed it again for America, so it's like that. But
Oh,
their teeth
I
are
like that.
slightly spikier on the new American cover.
Okay. Well, I'll have to look at the American cover again because, yeah, I loved the up and down, and the spikier the better. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is about all the time we have for today. So, thank you so much, Molly, for joining me today. I loved your book so much, and I was so stoked when you agreed to be on this interview with me. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. It's been really fun chatting about it, and really pleased that you asked.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone, Molly's book, Greenteeth, is out now. You can order it online. You can buy it wherever books are sold, and you absolutely should buy a copy for yourself, for your friends, for your family. It's one that so many people are going to love, young and old alike, and it's definitely worth your time. So check it out. I'll leave a link to my review down below if you'd like to view that as well. And again, Molly, thank you so much for being here. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.